Hi, I'm Rob, N1NUG, and today I want to tell you a story about how ham radio was able to play a part in getting me off the side of the road in the middle of a cold winter night back in the mid-90s when I was first licensed. Now, before I get on with the story, I want to tell you why I'm even making this video in the first place. I've been watching a little more YouTube, in particular ham radio YouTube, than I normally do the last few weeks. And it seems like a lot of the videos, well, maybe not a lot of the videos, but a number of the videos coming up in my feed are kind of negative in nature, or putting ham radio in a negative light, or talking about some negative thing about ham radio. And to be honest with you, I don't really like seeing that. I like to focus on the positive things about ham radio and all of the related hobbies. CB radio, GMRS radio, shortwave radio, electronics, that kind of a thing. One more thing before I get into the story. I want to challenge you to tell your positive stories about ham radio as well. Now, you don't have to be a ham radio YouTuber or have any kind of social media presence. Just when you're on the air talking to your buddies one night, just think back and tell them something positive about ham radio that happened to you or somebody you knew. Just something positive. What I'm trying to do here, like I said, is offset all these negative vibes that I'm hearing about ham radio. There's so much more positive about this hobby than there is negative, and I think we should be focusing on that instead of the few negative things that kind of cross our paths. I got my license back in 1992 when I was just 19 years old. In fact, my first ham radio license came in the mail, I think the day before or maybe a couple of days before my 19th birthday. So it was kind of a birthday present, but that's not really relevant to the story. I'm getting kind of on a tangent. Anyway, I had my license back then. So I think a year or two or three after I got my license, I don't remember exactly what year this happened in, my brother-in-law, who is now a licensed ham, he wasn't at the time, but I think it was sometime around Thanksgiving. He had been up in Vermont with my sister, probably for Thanksgiving, visiting his family up there. And for whatever reason, I think they had both of their cars, his truck and my sister's car. And they had gone up separately, I think, because of work schedules. Anyway, while they were up there, his truck quit. He couldn't get it started. He wasn't sure what was wrong, and he had to kind of get back to get to work. So it was kind of fortunate that they had both cars. So they were able to just ride back in my sister's car, and he left his truck up there for a week or two. Well, anyway, he needed some help to get his truck back to Connecticut. Or I think actually he was living in Massachusetts at the time. You get the point. He needed to get his truck back. My sister was busy or something was going on, so he asked me to ride up with him and drive one of the cars back and see if we could kind of get them both back. So I ended up riding up to central Vermont with my brother-in-law to get the truck. Now, he wasn't sure if it was going to start, but he brought some tools and had an idea that there was some kind of an electrical issue. He might have even brought a new battery up, I'm not sure. I think he thought maybe the battery was bad or the alternator was on its way out, something like that. So we got up there and I think he did some basic checks on the truck, tightened up all the electrical connections, checked the battery, that kind of a thing. And he was able to start it up, after doing all that work. It fired right up like it always had before. And so he drove it around a little bit up there and, kind of let it get up to temperature, and everything seemed fine. It was running just fine. So we made the decision to hit the road and see how far home we could make it, or if we could make it all the way, hopefully, before the truck quit. So we headed out. My brother-in-law was driving my sister's car, and I was driving his truck, the one that was kind of potentially flaky. And so we headed out. We hit Interstate 89 and drove all the way down to White River Junction, picked up Interstate 91, made it all the way through Vermont, and then about halfway through Massachusetts. And I think, I don't even remember all the details of the story, but I think we made it to the Greenfield area in Massachusetts. Or maybe it was Northampton, I don't even remember, but I think it was Greenfield. And we got right about just past one of the exits, or just to the exit something, and the truck started to quit. It died right there on the side of the highway. So my brother-in-law was following me. We both pulled over. We popped the hood, and no matter what we did, we couldn't get the truck running. But I think, if I remember right, he was able to figure out right there and there on the spot that the coil was bad. I don't remember if it was like hot or glowing even, but somehow in that moment he determined the coil was bad. And we figured that was it, right? And I think it was a Saturday night. You know, all the parts stores were closed. It's not like we were going to be able to swap that thing on the side of the highway right there. And of course, now to back up a step, like I said, this was the mid-90s. There were no cell phones or anything like that. We had no way to contact anybody really, other than the ham radio I had brought along. Like I said, I was first licensed a couple years before that, and so I was carrying my HT everywhere I went back then. And especially since we didn't have cell phones, you know, it was just something I always had on me. And luckily, we had made it into range of one of the more prominent repeaters in central Massachusetts, the Mount Tom Amateur Radio Club repeater on Mount Tom, which was, I don't know, a few miles south of where we were broken down. And now to back up a step, some of you may remember auto patches. If you were the member of a club, your club repeater more than likely had an auto patch, and you could make phone calls from the repeater if you knew how to access the auto patch. It was usually like a 4 or 5 digit code that you could punch in on your keypad on your HT, and it would bring up the auto patch, and you'd get a dial tone, and then you could just call any number that you wanted. You know, and back then, of course, there were long distances, you know, charges and things like that. So, you know, the club didn't want you making long distance calls if you could help it. But if you needed to make a quick call on your way home from work to tell your wife you were going to be late or something, you could do that. In fact, guys would do that. I would hear that all the time. It was kind of fun. And again, that was all before cell phones. So, get back on the story. We're broken down on the side of the road. I've got my HT. I'm not a member of the club. I don't have the auto patch, so I can't like dial it up and call, you know, my sister or somebody to come help us. And even if I could, it would have been a long distance call from there. So since I didn't have the auto patch code to bring that up, I hopped on the repeater and I asked if anyone was around and could help us out. And sure enough, somebody came right back to us. And at this point, I wish I could remember who it was, what their call sign was, that kind of a thing, because the guy was very helpful, very friendly. He was able to make the call, even though it was long distance. He was somewhere in Massachusetts, and he had to call down to Connecticut, just over the border, because my brother-in-law had at the time been doing some side work for a local garage. My brother-in-law was actually a carpenter, and he was doing carpentry work for them. But the owner of the garage was more than happy to get the tow truck fired up and drive the hour or so up to Northampton or Greenfield or wherever it was we were broken down, you know, from northern Connecticut, and come pick up the truck. And we were able to get home. He towed the truck back. I don't remember if he towed it to the garage or my brother-in-law's house, but he brought the truck back home, and we hopped in my sister's car and were able to get home, even at a reasonable hour, all things considered. If we didn't have ham radio to help us out back then, because there was no cell phones, we would have ended up having to walk probably several miles or whatever it was from where we were broken down to the nearest payphone or company or business or whoever would have let us use their phone to make a phone call and you know, get off the road, or wait for a police officer or something like that to come by. So that was kind of a bad situation turned good. And it left a lasting impression on me because it let me know early on in my ham radio career, if you want to call it that by and large, hams are out there and ready to help whatever it may be. You're broken down on the side of the road, or there's some kind of an emergency where somebody needs to provide communications. Hams are always there and ready to help. And that's just stuck with me for the last 30 years or whatever it's been. And I've, over the years, kept that in mind and tried to return that favor when I could. Now, nothing's for me ever come up quite like that, but you know, when it's been my turn to help out in ham radio, I've tried to do that. And I guess you could even say this channel is kind of an extension of that mindset where, you know, I try to make ham radio videos that are positive and encouraging and helpful to the ham community. What's your positive story about ham radio? I'd love to hear it down in the comments. Or even send me an email if you want, if it's a longer story and it's too much to put in the comments. Maybe I'll cover it in an upcoming video. I'd love to make this a recurring series on my channel. But having said all that, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you keep the positive aspects of ham radio in the forefront and publicize those instead of the negative ones. 7-3, and thanks for watching.